Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom, and I'm honored to serve as the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's senior minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all you're bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to guests who are joining us today. If you're visiting for the first time or joining us from afar, why don't you say hello in the chat now and tell us where you're joining us from? I welcome everyone into our worship service by inviting you to repeat our first church mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Let's go now to our beloved sanctuary to light the chalice, which is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism.
So hey, Yolanda, here we are. And our theme today is letting go and getting to joy. And like that should be easy. It feels like it should be easy, but sometimes it's not. There's a lot of reasons why. So I'm just wondering, how are you getting to joy right now in your life?
I think that one of the things that I've been practicing for a while, and especially right now, is making sure that I don't overcommit and that I prioritize myself so that I can give people the best version of myself. Something else that comes to mind right now is the ways that we are curating joy in our life. And one of the things that you said at the beginning of this conversation was that it should be something that's really simple. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to find joy in really big monumental things. But sometimes there is so much joy in the more simplistic things and everyday mundane things.
Yeah, totally. I think about that a lot lately. So to jump back a few steps to the lack of joy, it's hard right now, I think, in this hyper-connected place, and with things like impending doom of climate change or democracy crumbling or racism being just perfectly acceptable in so many spheres right now, to find a way to just really experience everyday joy. But to what you were saying, I mean, that's kind of been how I've been experiencing the most joy lately in my life, is in those moments where I'm not excited, I'm not amped up, I'm not at a party or something, but it's just those moments of gentle, boring contentedness of everyday life where I'm just doing something that maybe I have to do, or I want to do, or I'm just existing in a moment. And I have this strange feeling come over me. And this is new in my life. This has not been something I've noticed in the past, but where I just feel this calm, quiet, frankly, just boring sense of contentedness. And it's beautiful. And I've realized that's really for me what true joy feels like. It's not when I'm craving a sensation of joy or pleasure, but rather just experiencing the world in the moment. And I think that a big part of what's helped me do that is sort of dealing with the stress of everyday life and raising two little kids, because it just comes at you. And then there's these moments where you can kind of stop and experience the calm and the quiet, and it's beautiful. And that to me has been so striking. And I love that somehow I've gotten to a place where that's possible, because that's never been possible for me before, to really just step back and feel that simple pleasure of just simple joy.
It makes me so happy for you. And I think that I can echo that in that, there are a lot of big monumental things that have happened in my life and a lot of really exciting things to look forward to. And I have hobbies and yeah, they bring me joy. And I think some of the things that bring me the most joy aren't necessarily the most interesting. And an example of this is Jason and I went out to the Pacific Northwest to visit a really good friend of ours who relocated out there a couple of years ago. And because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to meet his new wife because they met and married during the times that we have been living in the past 2 years. And we got to get out there and meet her for the first time. And one of the things that they like to do is they love to go hiking. It's so beautiful out there and they're quite active. And she was asking me about what my hobbies were. And I just kind of looked at her and I said, to be honest, what brings me the most joy is spending time with my friends, sharing a meal with people that I love, and helping being a part of their children's lives. That is something that is really, really joyful to me. And it's not super exciting. It's very mundane, and so I think
Except
that
for your
it
friends are super cool.
I do have the most exciting friends. I have really fantastic friends, so maybe that's what makes it extraordinary. But I think, it's not something that you would necessarily say like, "Wow, she's such an interesting person," but, I find it tremendously interesting and I find it so heartwarming and it really brings me so much joy, and that's one of the things that I would say is something that brings a huge amount of happiness to my life. And amongst all of the things that we're dealing with currently, I can say that I am honestly the most content that I have ever been in my life, which is, it's a stark contrast to what's going on in the world, but in my heart, I'm quite happy.
That's amazing. That is so wonderful. And I mean, you really bring that into so many situations and interactions with people. And it's such a gift that you give in doing that, because it's so clear when we spend time together, how you just the way you bring a room together through that love that you feel. And it's so nice. I'm really glad for you and for all of us.
You're so kind. Thank you.
Well, here we have had a discussion about joy.
We sure have, and I
Yes.
hope that these little insights into our maybe boring, maybe mundane, but also interesting ways that we're finding joy can help all of our UU family find joy in the coming weeks and year to come as well.
Yeah, cheers to that. Happy solstice and happy new year, everyone.
Dark of winter, soft and still, your quiet calm surrounds me. Let my thoughts go where they will, ease my mind profoundly, and then my soul will sing a song, a blessed song of love eternal. Gentle darkness, soft and still, bring your quiet to me. Darkness, soothe my weary eyes, that I may see more clearly. When my heart with sorrow cries, comfort and caress me. And then my soul may hear a voice, a still small voice of love eternal. Darkness, when my fears arise, let your peace flow through me.
Thank you, Susie and Yolanda, for that delightful worship associate chat. Vanessa Goddard was working as the new operations director at the Buddhist Zen mountain monastery when she got into trouble. She had been working as the creative director for some time, but when she moved to the operations director role, she had little to no business experience. She overcompensated by pushing herself really hard, working nights and weekends, even working through the time set aside for spiritual practice. She was deeply devoted to the monastery, and she started to feel as though its success or failure rested solely on her shoulders. If she failed, she would not only let herself and her friends and colleagues down, she would ruin something she loved. She wrote about what she learned from her experience in the article Meta and Burnout in the fall 2021 issue of the Buddhist magazine Tricycle. Inevitably, Vanessa's internal critic, fear of failure, and incessant drive to succeed spilled out into her interactions with other people. When she tried to push other members of the monastery to work the hours that she was working, they understandably pushed back. She didn't listen to their feedback, though, and she just pushed harder. The fear that was ruling her internal world, as well as oppressive systems like capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy. The fear that she had within her that she wasn't good enough within the position or within the world, that all of this depended on her, that if she didn't get everything right, it would just crumble beneath her. It was too intense. Eventually, she ended up in a conflict resolution session with a friend who worked alongside her. Following the rituals of the monastery, the two people sat down on cushions facing one another in Buddha Hall. The monastery's practice was for Vanessa's friend to tell her how Vanessa had hurt her, and Vanessa's role was just to sit and quietly listen. Vanessa saw that her friend had brought in 2 legal-sized sheets of paper just covered in handwriting. Her friend said, "I brought some notes." When Vanessa saw that her friend's notes not only covered the entire 2 legal side pages, but that when her friend had run out of room on those pages, she turned them sideways to continue her list in the margins, Vanessa realized she needed to change her behavior. She was hurting people that she loved. Her inner perfectionist, her critic, was not only inner anymore, and she was causing harm to the people around her. The need to control is often born from an unholy marriage of love and fear. One of the central tenets of Buddhism is that attachment breeds suffering. We can and should love the things of this world, but because all of life and all of living is impermanent, we have to love with allowing rather than attachment and controlling. When we are very attached to someone or something, our fear of its loss can pervert our love into something that controls rather than something that accepts and allows. As the poet William Blake wrote, "He who binds himself to a joy does the winged life destroy. He who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise." But this is a hard lesson, one that most of us have to learn again and again, perhaps even returning to a spiritual community of regular practice in order to remember it. Clutching to rigid expectations or a sense of control might feel particularly intense or even painful right now. The holidays bring with them so much expectation, so many traditions, and yet this year, everything is different. Perhaps there's an empty chair at your holiday table, a beloved who is missing. Perhaps the crush of work and family obligations has you rushing to get the bare minimum done and feeling exhausted instead of joyful. Or perhaps this dastardly pandemic is messing with your holiday season again. COVID has changed so much about the holidays, from how we gather to with whom and when. It feels different. I know that many of us are looking forward to in-person worship services, either on Christmas Eve, if you already have your reservation, since our reservations are full, or in February, when we'll return to every Sunday in-person worship services. Don't worry, we'll also keep offering every Sunday online services at 10 a.m., but it will be such a joy to have the option to gather in person. And it will be different. We will be limited to 100 people per service with reservations. We'll be wearing masks, and we will not be singing as a collective body. We are in a time when joy is twinged with sorrow, when like twins, they mirror one another, woven in and through each other. What we love is impermanent. Some of what we love has been lost. Some of it will return, but in a new way. We are still in liminal space between what was before and what is yet to come. This is a time to surrender, to allow rather than control, and to be present with what is right now. It's time to forget our perfect offering and ring the bells that still can ring, to acknowledge what has been lost and honor the love that is still here right now. Joy and sorrow woven fine. Theologian Barbara Brown Taylor writes, quote, "The last 16 months have been hell for a lot of people. I know some who took their sick relatives to the emergency room and never saw them alive again. I know small business owners who kept everyone on payroll and watched their savings run through their fingers like rain. This makes it hard to talk about the gifts of this time, which stole a lot of things from a lot of people. Every time I try, it feels like being unfaithful to them. But if I don't do that, if I don't name the gifts of the past 16 months along with the thefts, then that feels like unfaithfulness to the wholeness that is always at work on my own wholeness, inviting me to the marriage of opposites and startling me with their chemistry. Why do I feel more noble when I lament than when I rejoice? Why is it so difficult to admit whole truths, not partial ones, into the mixed company of our own hearts? Barbara Brown Taylor is so wise. There are gifts in this moment, gifts of beauty in the deep dark night, gifts of presence in the slowness of now, gifts of balance and quiet luminosity and liminality. As human beings, we need joy to survive. We need to rejoice in this season with its mixed gifts of joy and sorrow woven fine. It is not a betrayal of our suffering or the suffering of others to experience pleasure right now. Indeed, it is an honoring of life to be present in the wholeness of both joy and suffering. When my father was in the hospital a few years ago, my family laughed a lot. We were struggling and we were so scared, but we needed to laugh together. We needed to listen to my dad make silly jokes with the nurses and pretend mock annoyance when we beat him at cards. We needed to feel one another's love, and we felt it through sharing joy, even in the hospital room, even on the frightening perch of impermanence. In his book, The Wisdom of Insecurity, author Alan Watts writes, "There is a contradiction in wanting to be perfectly secure in a universe whose very nature is momentariness and fluidity. But the contradiction lies deeper than the mere conflict between the desire for security and the fact of change. See, if I want to be secure, that is, protected from the flux of life, I am wanting to be separate from life. Yet it is this very sense of separateness which makes me feel insecure. To be secure means to isolate and fortify the I, but it is just the feeling of being an isolated I which makes me feel lonely and afraid. In other words, the more security I can get, the more I shall want." Watts continues, "To put it still more plainly, the desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. To hold your breath is to lose your breath. A society based on the quest for security is nothing but a breath retention contest in which everyone is as taut as a drum and as purple as a beet." Watts is right. Nothing is permanent in this world. The things we love change. Some of them disappear. And yet, this is the beauty and the mystery of this world. Living and dying are married. Love and grief are married. Security and insecurity are married. Joy and sorrow are woven fine. And in order to be able to appreciate the moment and dive deeply into the joy, we have to surrender to its loss. When Vanessa Goddard returned to her work after her conflict resolution session and tried to be less controlling, she still struggled. She remembered the words of her teacher, Hogan, who years before had given her the advice to just love them. This was irritating advice at the time when she had just wanted a practical approach to dealing with people, with her coworkers, but it presented itself to her again in her new struggle. As she tried to let go of control, she heard her teacher's voice telling her to just love them. And she realized that she wasn't irritated at the advice. She was afraid of it. Because if she tried to love her co-workers, then she would have to accept them as they were, which would lead down the road to accepting the world as it was, and ultimately to accepting herself as she was. She would have to love herself and all her inner voices, her insecurities, her failures. She would have to love her own criticism and judgment, all the parts of her screaming at her to change, to do better, to be more perfect. She would have to accept herself and all her parts. And it was terrifying. The advice to just love them was simple, and she understood its rightness, but it felt impossible. Finally, in the middle of a week-long silent retreat, Vanessa had a breakthrough. She was in the middle of her usual end of the day exhaustion when, quote, "The next thing I knew, my mind was bright, clear, and as far as I could tell, completely empty of thought. Instead, what filled me to the brim was a slow spreading feeling of love, like a drop of ink released into a bowl of water. The feeling, it started in my chest and it gradually extended outward until it completely suffused my body and mind. Then it kept growing. It filled the zendo, enveloping the 100 or so sitters around me doing zazen in neat rows, quiet as trees. It encompassed the building, the snow-covered field that surrounded it, and the mountain rising in the distance. It grew and grew until I felt myself to be a dot in an ocean of love so vast and at once so gentle and fierce that it was overwhelming. It did overwhelm me. It overwhelmed me until I couldn't find myself anymore. That was the first time I thought of myself in the ground of all being, which was love. The first time I clearly felt that emptiness is not empty at all, but is filled with love. You just have to love them was the simplest, most direct instruction Hogan could have given me. It was also the truest. Vanessa told herself later to remember, forget about things left done or left to do. Forget about deadlines and milestones, profits and quotas. Those will be taken care of. They always are. So don't worry. Whenever a being appears in front of you, just love them. That is your focus. That's where the real work lies. My dear ones, Vanessa is right. The real work lies in just loving the beings that appear in front of you. This is what matters. Not the to-do lists or the perfect offerings or the decorations or the right presents or the best dinner, not the complete budgets or the best profit margins or the grant secured. But just loving them is also not a soft, gentle cushion or an easy cliche. It is the hardest, most important work of your life. It requires surrender. Surrender to loss. Surrender to your own vulnerability and imperfection. Surrender to impermanence. It exposes you, not just to grief, but to the vagaries of yourself and the world. And it is worth it. because in that exposure, it exposes you to life. It engages you in the immense now of living. This holiday season, my dear ones, my wish for you is to just love them and to just love yourself, to move into the terror of life, which is impermanence, but also to know you are held by the ground of being, which is love. May it be so, and amen. It has been a blessing to be together. May you go out from here nourished and renewed, and use that to choose to bless the world. Until we meet again, may you be held, may you be healed, may you be whole. Blessed be, and amen.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.